The deep space radar blared to life, piercing the unnatural stillness that hung in the control room like thick smoke. Garrick Thorne snapped to attention, his pulse quickening. The sterile, cold air of the Nevada facility felt suffocating as he leaned closer to the glowing laser plasma display in front of him. His hand instinctively tightened around the armrest of his chair, fingers digging into the worn leather as if trying to anchor himself. What he saw flickering across the screen wasn't supposed to be there. At first, it was just another anomaly among millions of fleeting signals, each one either a cosmic event or random noise. But this one had a rhythm to it, a pattern that made his mind race. "What the hell is that?" His voice was rough, the air in his lungs suddenly too thick to breathe comfortably. It was unlike anything he had ever seen in his 15 years working at this station, and it set off an instinctive warning deep inside him. The strange signal repeated every 10.3 minutes. Definite, deliberate. It didn't belong. It wasn't a natural occurrence. This was something else. Someone else. "We've got something coming in, sir," Garrick said, his voice low but commanding. He wasn't speaking to anyone in particular. His gaze stayed fixed on the display as his fingers flew across his control panel, adjusting frequencies, shifting filters. The pattern didn't break. Another few seconds and his throat tightened as the message began to form. "Please help. Colonies under attack. Peaceful species. No weapons. Please help." The words were foreign, but they were urgent, raw, a cry for help. Earth wasn't supposed to be listening for this, but there it was, hanging in the air like a desperate whisper. His eyes narrowed as he zoomed in on the coordinates flashing on the screen. The numbers blurred for a moment, but when they came into focus, his heart skipped a beat. The coordinates pointed to a cluster of planets near the Andromeda Belt, a sector humanity had only recently mapped out. "Sir, these coordinates, they—" Garrick's voice trailed off as the magnitude of what he was seeing sank in. He pressed his fingers to his temple, trying to steady his thoughts, but everything inside him screamed that this wasn't just a routine transmission. It wasn't just another dead space signal begging for a scan. This was real, and it was already too late. "Garrick, get me General Chorus," came a calm voice from the intercom, cutting through the tension in the room. Commander Lina, the head of operations, her voice was steady, but there was an unmistakable edge to it. Garrick hit the comms button with a sharp slap, his knuckles white against the console. "General Chorus, I need you here. We have something urgent." As he awaited the response, the room around him seemed to grow smaller, the hum of electronics intensifying. His senses were on fire. Every screen, every laser plasma flickering in the dim light seemed to scream for attention. The display continued to pulse, an undeniable force against the walls of logic. Garrick's mind raced. He ran through the possibilities. Was this some sort of enemy weapon system testing itself? Or was it something else? His gaze flicked between the flickering plasma lights, the code unraveling before him. Minutes later, the door to the control room opened with a sharp hiss. General Amara Chorus entered, her heavy boots clanking against the floor, her face drawn and serious. Despite the tension, Garrick couldn't help but notice her presence. It was like standing in the eye of a storm, commanding, unyielding. "What's going on, Garrick?" She didn't waste time with pleasantries. Her eyes locked onto the screen, scanning it with a trained, practiced intensity that only came with years of command. Her hand rested lightly on the edge of the console, like a blade waiting to be drawn. Garrick spoke quickly, trying to keep his voice from betraying his anxiety. "A transmission. It's not from any known source. The message keeps repeating itself every 10 minutes. It's a distress signal." "A distress signal?" Chorus's brow furrowed as she leaned in closer, her sharp eyes narrowing at the screen. "This isn't a hoax, Garrick." "I don't think so, General. It's not like anything I've seen, and the coordinates, they point to the Andromeda Belt." Chorus let out a low breath, the weight of the situation sinking in. She stood silently for a moment, staring at the screen, absorbing the significance. Then she looked at Garrick, her expression unreadable. "Can you decode it?" Garrick hesitated. "I'm not sure. The encoding looks alien, But there's a pattern. He hesitated again. It feels wrong, like someone is trying to tell us something, but we're not supposed to understand it yet. General Chorus crossed her arms, eyes scanning the data. Her voice was soft, almost reverent. Do we send a ship out? Garrick shifted uncomfortably in his seat. We need to act fast. This message, these planets, General, they're already under attack. There was no more waiting. The decision was made. Commander Lina, patch through to Earth Command. We need the entire Council in on this, now. The order echoed through the control room, its finality striking like a hammer against the tension. The air thickened around them. Garrick knew this wasn't just a typical alien encounter. Something far more dangerous was approaching, something Earth wasn't prepared for. The Virka, the peaceful species seeking help. They were already dying, and Garrick knew they might already be too late to save them. The message repeated again. Please help. Colonies under attack. Peaceful species. No weapons. Please help. But this time, as the final echoes of the message reverberated in the control room, Garrick felt the weight of it settle in his chest. The Death Worlders were coming. The control room buzzed with urgency as Garrick and General Chorus watched the laser plasma display flicker, the coordinates of the alien transmission still glowing ominously on the screen. The weight of what they'd just discovered sank deeper into the room, suffocating the air and wrapping every thought in the tension of uncertainty. The message continued to pulse, a plea, a cry for help from somewhere far beyond humanity's reach. Outside, the sky darkened, the heavy Nevada night settling over the facility, as if the universe itself was drawing a veil over what was about to unfold. Garrick felt the air thicken with the anticipation of something larger than any conflict he had ever known. He looked at Chorus, her jaw clenched tight, her gaze unwavering. In that moment, he could see the years of command experience in her eyes, but even she didn't know what to make of this. We need to make a decision. Chorus's voice was a quiet command, sharp with the weight of authority but laced with an underlying tension. The flickering lights of the display cast sharp shadows across her face as she absorbed the enormity of what they were about to engage with. I'm not sure what you're asking, General. We either send someone, or we don't. Garrick's voice was gruff, the strain of the moment showing. Chorus turned toward him, the worn leather of her jacket creaking with the shift of her posture. She exhaled slowly, watching the blinking lights as if they would somehow hold the answer. The rest of the room, once quietly functional, now seemed to hum with the heightened energy of too many unspoken questions. Crew members hurried between stations, their footsteps punctuating the thick air as they maintained their stations, but none dared speak, knowing better than to interrupt the silent war that had just begun. If we send a ship, we may be sending them to their death. Chorus finally spoke, voice low but resolute. She wasn't just referring to the unknown enemies in the transmission. She was weighing humanity's first move in an intergalactic war that could change everything. Garrick's lips pressed into a thin line. He knew the danger, knew that even the best preparations might not be enough. But what choice did they have? The longer they waited, the further the Virka's colonies would fall. The urgency in the message rang louder in his mind now, a nagging insistence that pushed him forward. If we do nothing, how many more colonies fall? Garrick's voice was firm, his mind working through the risks like a seasoned tactician calculating the best possible move in a losing game. The room fell silent as everyone turned to Chorus. The stakes were no longer abstract. This wasn't just a command. This was about survival. You're right, Chorus said after a pause, the words heavy with the weight of the decision. We're sending a ship, but it won't just be a rescue mission. Her voice sharpened as she gestured to the laser plasma displays, where the images of the Virka planets were now filled with dark red-tinged symbols indicating devastation. The intelligence from the intercepted transmission wasn't enough. They needed to know more. She keyed in commands on her terminal, and the displays shifted, showing the military assets Earth could deploy. Garrick watched the fleet formations, each ship represented by small icons. They were not enough? Not nearly enough. We need the most battle-hardened team we have. Chorus turned her gaze back to Garrick, locking eyes with him. "You'll lead this mission. We'll put together a strike team capable of reaching the heart of the enemy's territory." "Understood." Garrick's voice was steady, but his mind already whirred with calculations. The room buzzed with preparation as crew members scrambled to implement the order. The door to the control room opened with a soft hiss, and Commander Lina entered, her sharp features lit by the glow of the heads-up displays. She glanced at the two leaders, the tension in the air almost palpable. "We've just received orders from Earth Command. They want us to assemble a briefing for the UN Council within the hour." Chorus nodded curtly, her mind already in motion. "Tell them to prepare for the worst, and that we're not just heading out to play defense, we're going to strike first." "You're not seriously thinking of going on the offensive, are you?" Lina's voice was measured, though there was no mistaking the concern there. The last time Earth had gone on the offensive in an alien conflict had left scars that hadn't yet healed. "We don't have time to be cautious anymore," Garrick interjected, leaning over the terminal. His fingers tapped rapidly, bringing up the recent intel. "We've been sitting on the sidelines too long. If we don't strike first, they'll wipe us out without hesitation." Lina seemed to hesitate for a moment, then gave a quick nod. "All right, I'll get the briefing to the Council, but I'm not promising we get full backing for a full-scale assault." As Lina left, Garrick turned his focus back to the mission at hand. His mind raced, picking apart the Vraxian forces' patterns, trying to anticipate their next move. The more he studied, the more he realized just how unprepared they were. He muttered under his breath, adjusting the tactical display as a series of Vraxian warships appeared, their dark, jagged forms a stark contrast to the sleek, angular lines of Earth's own fleet. Corey stepped up beside him, her face hard. "What are you thinking, Garrick?" she asked softly, though her eyes didn't leave the screen. "They don't know what we're capable of," Garrick replied, eyes still locked on the shifting digital map. "We'll exploit their weaknesses, their overconfidence. They'll never see it coming." He paused, looking up at her, his gaze unwavering. "But we need to move quickly. I'll need a team that can execute this strategy without hesitation. We won't get a second chance." Cora's lips pressed into a thin line, and she nodded. "Get your team together. I'll make sure we have all the support we can muster." As she turned and left the room, Garrick took a slow breath. The weight of what he was about to ask his team to do felt suffocating. They were venturing into the unknown, facing an enemy that had already shown itself to be ruthless beyond comprehension. Yet, Garrick couldn't shake the feeling that this was their only chance. They were about to show the galaxy what Earth was truly capable of, and the price of failure would be steep. The laser plasma displays continued to pulse, filling the room with harsh light as the countdown to action began. The command center was a cacophony of motion and sound, feet slamming against the metallic floors, voices pitching higher, growing louder as the countdown to launch began. Garrick's eyes locked on the laser plasma display before him, the alien maps pulsing with cold blue light as he dragged his fingers across the screen, zooming in on the enemy stronghold. The Vraxian warships were gathered in a sprawling formation, like jagged stones in an unforgiving sea, their spiked hulls almost daring anyone to challenge them. The tension was palpable, tightening in his chest with every passing second. "We need to move faster," he muttered under his breath, knowing that every minute wasted could cost them the initiative. His team was assembling around him, soldiers who'd seen countless battles but never one like this. Even they felt the weight of the unknown pressing down, an almost tangible force in the room. The air, thick with the scent of stale metal and ionized air, seemed to pulse in rhythm with the rising anticipation. Across the room, Tessa Varick, the lead tactician, was already reviewing the tactical data. Her fingers were moving like lightning over her console, adjusting fleet configurations on the heads-up display. Her sharp eyes flicked back and forth, scanning the streams of data that painted a grim picture of the Vraxian defense network. "They're more entrenched than we thought. Their planetary shields are set at full power. We'll have to hit them in waves to break through. Waves won't be enough. We need to breach their defenses before they even realize we're there," Garrick shot back, his tone cold as steel. He wasn't wasting time. We need a diversion, something big enough to make them panic so they underestimate our real strike. Tessa raised an eyebrow, turning slightly in her chair. You're talking about sending a sacrificial fleet to draw fire. You know that will cost us. I'm not asking for a sacrifice, I'm asking for a setup. His voice tightened, the grim reality of his plan settling in. We'll send a decoy force, small but armed with enough firepower to get their attention. It'll draw the bulk of their ships, leaving their capital defenses vulnerable. She nodded slowly, processing the strategy. It's risky. They'll realize what we're doing sooner than we'd like. By the time they do, we'll be halfway through their outer defenses. Garrick's eyes locked onto the heads-up display again, adjusting the fleet positions on the hologram with decisive movements. He wasn't asking for anyone's approval. He was already committed. Behind him, Aaron Tail, a grizzled veteran of countless covert operations, stood with his arms crossed, the tension in his posture betraying the calm of his face. His hands twitched slightly, as if itching for the familiar weight of his weapon. "And if we fail?" he asked, his voice carrying the unspoken weight of a man who knew that failure could mean the end of it all. "We won't fail," Garrick replied sharply, his gaze unwavering. He had no room for doubt now. They'd spent too long preparing for this moment. This was their one chance to strike first, and Garrick would not allow it to slip away. The room fell silent as everyone absorbed the implications of their mission. This wasn't just a fight for survival. This was about making a statement to the galaxy. Earth had been pushed into a corner, and now they were responding with a force that no one had seen before. Garrick stood taller, his heartbeat steady in his chest, his mind already a battlefield of calculations and contingencies. "We're launching in 2 hours," Chorus said, her voice cutting through the quiet, snapping everyone back to reality. "Garrick, I want you to brief the squad. We're going all in, no second chances." "Understood," Garrick replied, his tone now flat, focused. "Get everyone into position. I'll brief them now." He stepped away from the console, his boots clicking softly against the cold floor as he moved toward the briefing room. The air in the hallways felt like a storm was rolling through, thick with the weight of impending action. Crew members passed him by, their faces grim, eyes sharp with anticipation. They had all trained for this, but no one had expected it to come this soon. The briefing room was a small utilitarian space, with a round table in the center and a laser plasma screen at one end. Garrick stepped in, followed by Chorus, Tessa, and Aaron, the rest of the team filtering in behind them. He could feel the eyes of every soldier on him as he took his place at the head of the table, their expressions unreadable but their bodies tense, coiled, and ready. "We're not just hitting them," Garrick's voice cut through the murmur of the room. "We're going to make them feel like they've already lost. This won't be a fight. It will be a slaughter, on our terms." He brought up the tactical layout on the plasma screen, the ship's positions and orbital paths laid out before them. "Here's the plan. We're going to use a decoy fleet." He gestured to a small portion of the display, a handful of ships clustered in a tight formation. "They're going to pull their attention while we push through their outer defenses with everything we have. By the time they realize the full force of our attack, we'll have their capital exposed and vulnerable." A murmur ran through the room, but no one spoke up immediately. Garrick's eyes scanned each face before him, assessing their readiness. Finally, Neela Dorn, the team's comms officer, spoke up, her voice hesitant but firm. "And when they realize it's a ruse?" "By then, it'll be too late," Garrick answered without hesitation. "We'll have already crippled their ability to respond. They won't have time to adapt. They never do." "It's a tight window," Aaron added, his tone tinged with skepticism. "How are we sure they won't adapt faster than we expect?" "We'll give them a reason to underestimate us," Garrick said, his gaze cold and unwavering. "The decoy fleet will make them think they're in control, but we're going to use that to create chaos in their ranks. By the time they recover, we'll already be in position." The room was silent for a moment as everyone processed the risks. Garrick could feel the weight of their doubt, but he also felt their resolve. They had no other choice. "We launch in 2 hours," Chorus said, her voice breaking the tension. "Make it count, everyone." The soldiers began to file out, the weight of the mission pressing down on them like an unspoken promise. As Garrick stepped out into the hallway, his boots echoing against the walls, he felt a flicker of doubt, a fleeting thought of failure, but he shut it down. He couldn't afford to entertain that. Not now. The mission was set. In less than 2 hours they would be heading into enemy space, and this would either be the end of the Vraxian threat or the beginning of something far worse. The countdown had already begun. The air inside the command center crackled with a nervous energy that rippled through the walls and floors. Garrick's boots echoed on the polished metal as he moved between the rows of laser plasma displays, his eyes darting between each tactical readout with sharp focus. His mind was a blur of calculations, strategies, and variables, each one clicking into place, his instincts pulling him further into the zone where decisions felt both instantaneous and unyielding. "We're clear to launch," Commander Lina's voice came through the comms, cutting through the heavy silence like a knife. Garrick looked up from his console, meeting her gaze across the room. Her expression was a mask of composure, but he could see the quiet fire burning beneath it. She knew the stakes as well as he did. This was no longer a matter of strategy. It was a gamble for survival. "All ships are in position. Decoy fleet ready." Tessa's voice crackled from the comms panel, her usual calm infused with an undercurrent of anticipation. "We launch in 10. Garrick nodded, adjusting the display in front of him to the fleet's projected path. The decoy fleet, small but packed with enough firepower to pull the Vraxians' attention, was already moving. He could see them on the heads-up display, a cluster of ships, hovering just outside the Vraxian detection perimeter. They were the bait. His own fleet, positioned just beyond them, would move at the first sign of the enemy's shift in focus. The tension in the room grew with every passing second. The temperature seemed to rise as Garrick's fingers danced across the console. His eyes flickered from one display to another, his heart beating in sync with the countdown. 50 seconds. Tessa's words hung in the air like a faint echo. The metallic tang of the room settled heavily in his nostrils, the bitter tang of ionized air mingling with the faint scent of sweat as it clung to his uniform. He could feel the weight of the moment pressing against his chest, constricting his breaths. It was a feeling Garrick had known too well, a call to battle, the taste of iron in his mouth as the seconds ticked away. His mind briefly flickered to the faces of his team, each one ready for the chaos about to unfold. The sudden urge to say something, to offer them reassurance, was drowned in the instant that followed. There would be no room for words now, only action. "Decoy fleet launching," Chorus's voice broke the silence again, sharp and final. "Launch confirmed. We move on your mark, Garrick." He glanced one last time at the simulation before him. The Vraxian fleet loomed on the far side of the map, a terrifying block of darkness that radiated aggression. They were already shifting into motion. The decoy was doing its job. The bait had been taken. "Move." Garrick's voice was a quiet command, but in the next instant, the ship trembled beneath them as his own fleet surged forward, pulling away from the shadows of the decoy and into the fray. The walls seemed to pulse with every movement of the ships, every calculated maneuver pushing them closer to the heart of the Vraxian territory. The hum of the ship's internal systems was a distant murmur beneath the crushing weight of anticipation. On the laser plasma displays, the enemy fleet was scattering, moving into position to engage the decoy ships. The decoy fleet was taking fire now, its ships barely holding up under the intense barrage. A series of explosions rocked the simulation, fire trailing in the wake of each falling vessel. Garrick didn't flinch. "Keep moving," he barked, his hands moving rapidly over the display, tracking their trajectory. "We breach in 15 seconds. A flash of white light erupted across the display as enemy ships moved into their blind spots, unaware of the deadly force moving in from the rear. Garrick's fleet was positioned perfectly. The decoy was doing its job, but now the real test was whether they could execute the breach with the speed and ferocity needed to break the Vraxian defenses wide open. "They're shifting!" Tessa's voice came, cutting through the tension like a crack of thunder. The Vraxian ships were realigning, their large crystalline forms moving with terrifying coordination as they adjusted to the new threat. It was too late. Fire. The order was almost drowned by the roar of gunfire, the air thick with the palpable tension of a moment that would either break or make them. On the laser plasma displays, the first volley of human missiles erupted, cutting through the vast darkness of space with brutal, calculated precision. Each explosion that lit the blackness was a testament to their strategy. Hit hard, hit fast, and hit with the knowledge that no one could anticipate the speed with which humanity's strike came. The Vraxians fought back immediately, their weapons unleashed a hellstorm of energy, beams tearing through space with blinding speed. Garrick felt the tremors of each hit against his own ship, but his fleet didn't hesitate. The tactics were already in motion. Every maneuver, every twist and turn, was designed to disorient the enemy, to create a sense of chaos that would blind them to what was coming next. A voice broke over the comms, harsh and strained. "They're adapting faster than we thought." It was Aaron, his voice thick with the tension of combat. "We've got incoming reinforcements." Garrick's pulse quickened, but his voice remained steady. "Hold position. We can't let them regroup. Keep them on the defensive." The battlefield was chaos. Explosions erupted in flashes of light that burned bright against the pitch black of space, illuminating the vast expanse of Vraxian ships, now frantically moving to re-establish their line of defense. Earth ships moved like predators in the night, faster than the enemy could track. Garrick's fleet was hitting them from every angle, their warships gliding with silent grace as if guided by an instinct older than civilization itself. And yet, despite all the planning, the Vraxians were not yielding easily. One of their massive ships broke through the formation, launching a counterstrike that tore through the hull of one of Earth's warships. The explosion sent shockwaves through the command center, rattling the floor beneath Garrick's feet, the force of it reverberating through his chest. "Status?" he demanded, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "Shields are holding, but they're pushing back harder. We've lost 2 fighters." Tessa's voice was grim. "The Vraxians aren't underestimating us anymore." Garrick's eyes narrowed. The first wave had done its job, but the true challenge was just beginning. The Vraxians had adapted, as expected, but the full brunt of their retaliatory force was just starting to make itself known. His mind was already racing, shifting through new possibilities, new tactics. He knew what he had to do. "Prepare for Phase 2. His voice was colder now, as the next phase of the plan began to take shape. He wasn't just going to play the Vraxians' game anymore. He was going to change it. The corridor was dark as Garrick made his way to the briefing room, his boots muffled against the cold, metallic floor. He could still feel the aftershocks of the battle vibrating through his bones, the sharp tang of burning metal lingering in the air, and the heavy, relentless pulse of adrenaline coursing through his veins. The stench of ionized air and the sharp taste of sweat clung to the back of his throat, reminders of the chaotic moments just past. The blast from the Vraxian retaliation had been a near miss, and despite the heavy losses, Earth's fleet was pushing forward. They were still in the fight, but now the real challenge had begun. "Garrick, we need to talk." Chorus's voice broke the silence as she approached from the shadows of the hallway, her footsteps soft but deliberate. She was the only person in the room who seemed as calm as ever, her expression unreadable, a perfect mask of a commander under pressure. Garrick glanced at her, his jaw set tight. "I'm not sure how much longer we can keep this up. They're adapting too quickly." Chorus nodded, her eyes scanning the laser plasma display embedded into the wall. "We need more than just firepower now. The Vraxians have seen everything we've thrown at them. They're preparing for the next wave, and they'll anticipate our every move." "Then we change the game," Garrick said, his voice low but with the force of resolve. "We keep them guessing, keep them off balance. We'll hit them where they least expect it." As they moved into the briefing room, the rest of the command team was already gathered, their faces drawn with exhaustion but their eyes sharp, alert. The aftermath of the attack had taken its toll, but no one was ready to back down, not yet. The air in the room was thick with anticipation, the smell of stale coffee and faint traces of sweat marking the ongoing tension. Garrick felt it sink into his bones, the gnawing weight of an enemy that wouldn't stop until they had broken every last bit of resistance. "We're not out of the woods yet." Tessa's voice cut through the room like a knife. She was standing near the laser plasma display, her fingers dancing over the console, pulling up new data. Their reinforcements are on their way. We've hit them hard, but they're regrouping faster than we can adapt. Garrick's eyes flicked over the display. A fresh wave of Vraxian ships was moving toward them, the jagged silhouette of their capital ships cutting through the display like sharks in a blood-red sea. They were closing in, and Earth's fleet was dangerously stretched thin. "We need to act now," Aaron said, his gravelly voice barely above a whisper. His face was worn, tired from the endless hours of combat and strategy. He met Garrick's eyes with the kind of unspoken understanding that only came from years of facing death together. If we wait any longer, we'll be outnumbered. And we won't make it if we charge in head first. Chorus spoke calmly, her hand resting on the edge of the table as she studied the data. "We need to outsmart them." Garrick's eyes flicked to the map, narrowing in on the Vraxian fleet. Their ships were structured, rigid, defensive. There was little room for flexibility in their tactics, and that was the key. If they could push them into a corner, they could force them to break. The question was, how? "We have one chance." Garrick's voice was low, but it held the weight of command. "The Vraxians have been playing it safe, staying in their formation. It's predictable. We hit them from every angle, but we need to strike faster than they can adjust." A sharp silence settled in the room as everyone processed the plan. "But we need to know exactly where to strike." Tessa's voice broke through the quiet, a note of frustration creeping in. "If we just dive in blind, we'll get torn apart." Garrick nodded. "We don't need to go blind." His fingers tapped rapidly across the laser plasma display, pulling up detailed intel from the recent battle. "We've already seen their defensive weaknesses. Their rear shields are the least protected. They're designed to resist frontal assault, but they're too rigid to cover every angle." Chorus's brow furrowed as she studied the data, eyes flicking from one readout to another. "You're suggesting a two-pronged attack? We can't afford to split our forces." "Not split, sink." Garrick's eyes were intense, focused. "We hit them from both sides, coordinated. We move in waves, but they don't know where to expect the next one. We overwhelm them. The key is speed." The room fell into another stretch of quiet, the weight of the plan sinking in. No one spoke, but the implications were clear. It would be their most aggressive move yet, and the most dangerous. One mistake could unravel everything. "We'll need every ship to make this work. No room for hesitation." Tessa's fingers hovered over the console, already inputting the new orders. "We hit them in a synchronized strike, just like you said. If we don't catch them off guard, we're finished." Garrick's heart pounded in his chest as he met Chorus's gaze. She nodded, the subtle movement heavy with resolve. The risk was immense, but the alternative was worse. The Vraxians wouldn't stop. Not until Earth was nothing more than a husk. "All right, we move out in 15 minutes. Garrick's voice cut through the tension, his tone unwavering. "Get the fleet into position. I want full throttle as soon as the signal's given. We do this together, or we don't do it at all." The room stirred into motion, the crew already springing into action, preparing for the next phase of the attack. The laser plasma displays flickered as they updated with new intel, their lights a constant reminder of the war that was rapidly escalating beyond their control. Outside the command room, the hum of activity in the fleet grew louder. Ships were making their final adjustments, the last of the fleet's resources being used to prepare for what Garrick knew would be the most critical moment of the war. He could feel it in the pit of his stomach, the anticipation, the sense of an impending storm that could sweep them all away in its wake. But this was the only path forward. They either destroyed the Vraxian fleet now, or Earth's survival would be a distant dream. Garrick stepped away from the console, the weight of the decision settling on his shoulders. The countdown had begun. The next move would either seal their victory or their fate. The plan was set, and there was no turning back. The command center erupted in synchronized chaos as Garrick's voice sliced through the thick tension in the air. The fleet was already in position, their ships lined up in perfect formation, ready to execute the carefully laid plan. The laser plasma displays flickered to life as new data streamed in, showing the Vraxian fleet massive and menacing, like a dark cloud of jagged steel, moving slowly but relentlessly toward Earth's defenses. Garrick could almost feel the heat of their weapons, the cold, unyielding force of their will, pressing against them. "Coordinates locked. The first wave is ready," Tessa's voice rang out, calm but carrying the edge of anticipation. She stood at her console, her fingers flying across the display as she fine-tuned the tactical approach. Beside her, Aaron stood with his arms crossed, his face a mask of determination, but Garrick could see the tension in his jaw, the way his eyes flickered between the data and the rest of the crew. "Initiating Phase 1 in 5, Garrick commanded, his words firm, his presence steady. The flickering light from the displays cast sharp shadows across his face, the gravity of the moment settling into every fiber of his being. This was it. No more second chances. Earth's survival hinged on the next few minutes. The soft sounds of boots moving swiftly against the floor mixed with the rising hum of the ship's internal systems. Garrick barely registered the noise. He could feel the energy building, the pulse of the mission deep in his chest, drowning out the peripheral sounds of those around him. His hands hovered over the display, his fingers flexing, ready to issue the next command. The air was thick with the scent of metal and burnt coffee, the sharp taste of tension lingering in his throat. "Launch decoy." The words were out of his mouth before he could even process them fully. They'd known this was coming. The decoy fleet, a small but ferocious group of ships, would push the Vraxians into a reactionary mode, giving Earth's real fleet a brief window to slip through their defensive perimeter. The decoy would bear the brunt of the battle, drawing the enemy's attention and leaving Earth's main fleet to exploit the opening. The first wave of ships surged forward, cutting through the darkness like predators in the night, their dark forms almost blending with the void around them. The decoy fleet moved in, their weapons already primed, firing explosive volleys designed to hit with the force of a stampede. The blast of light from their weapons shattered the darkness, and Garrick felt a flicker of hope ignite within him. It was working. The Vraxian ships veered into position, their massive forms shifting to retaliate. But Garrick wasn't watching them anymore. His eyes stayed glued to the second display, tracking his own fleet's movements, waiting for the right moment. "The Vraxians are falling for it," Tessa said, her voice calm despite the intensity in the room. She spoke the truth. The enemy was too focused on the decoy, too convinced that Earth's real attack would come from the front. But the real battle was about to begin in the blind spots where their defenses were weakest. "Move in!" Garrick's command was a whisper in the stillness, but it carried the weight of a lifetime of training and sacrifice. The seconds between now and the attack seemed to stretch, slow, as if time itself was holding its breath. Earth's fleet surged forward, cutting through the Vraxian defense line like a knife through flesh. The ships moved with the deadly precision of a machine, synchronized, each part knowing its place, working together with an almost unnatural grace. The laser plasma displays flickered again, showing their ships closing in, their weapons activating, missiles ready to tear apart the Vraxian defenses. The room held its breath. The silence was thick with anticipation, punctuated only by the low sound of fingers flying over buttons, the click of boots, the soft murmur of the comms team coordinating the action. The smell of sweat was heavy in the air, and Garrick could taste the tension in the room, a sharp, metallic edge that made his throat dry. "We've hit their outer defenses, but they're adapting." Tessa's voice was edged with the urgency of the moment. Garrick's eyes flickered to the display, his fingers tightening against the console. The Vraxians were regrouping, shifting their positions, reinforcing their defenses, but it was too late. They were reacting to the wrong threat. "No hesitation, go to Phase 2. Garrick snapped, his voice cutting through the rising noise. He could feel the heat of the moment radiating from every angle, the pressure of the battle closing in on them. They were in it now, and there was no turning back. "Moving into position." Aaron's voice was barely audible over the growing tension. He was already issuing the command to break through the final line of defense, the last obstacle before they could strike at the heart of the Vraxian fleet. Garrick's heart pounded in his chest as he watched their fleet, a mass of ships moving toward the Vraxian command center. The massive, jagged shapes of the enemy fleet grew larger on the screen, their weapons powering up, ready to retaliate. "Shields up!" a voice echoed across the comms, and the floor beneath Garrick's feet shuddered as the first shots were fired. The explosion rattled the walls, and the room seemed to breathe with the blast, as if the ship itself was alive, reacting to the violence unfolding just outside. The light from the display flared, painting the walls in harsh, glowing reds and blues, highlighting the terror of the fight. "We've got incoming fire," Tessa said, her tone no longer steady. "They're not backing down. Neither are we. Hold the line." Garrick's voice was sharp, unwavering. The weight of command was never heavier than it was in this moment. The Vraxians were showing no signs of slowing down, but neither was Earth's fleet. They were relentless now, pushing forward, striking harder. Garrick knew this wasn't just a fight for survival. It was a fight for their place in the galaxy. The laser plasma displays flashed once more, showing their ships moving into position. The Vraxian formation was breaking apart under the pressure, their shields faltering, their defenses crumbling. Earth's fleet had done it. They had reached the heart of the Vraxian Empire. "It's working. We're in." Tessa's voice held a strange mix of disbelief and triumph, the first flicker of hope breaking through the tension. But Garrick's eyes remained fixed on the screen, his pulse still racing. They had made it this far, but the hardest part was still ahead. The Vraxian command center, the heart of their power, loomed ahead, and Garrick knew that if they didn't take it now, everything they had fought for would be lost. "Prepare for Phase 3, he said, his voice low, steady. The real battle was about to begin, and he couldn't afford to let up now, not when they were so close. The countdown to the next move had already begun, but Garrick couldn't shake the feeling that the Vraxians had something left to throw at them, something they hadn't seen yet. And when it came, it would be nothing short of devastating. The command center was alive with tension, every breath in the room heavy and thick. Garrick's eyes remained fixed on the laser plasma display in front of him, tracking the Vraxian fleet's movements as they scattered, retreating and reforming into a brutal line of defense. The pressure was mounting, the oppressive silence of space outside their ship amplifying every shift in the air around him. The rest of the crew moved in a blur of efficiency, adjusting frequencies, rerouting power, and recalculating trajectories. The smell of stale air and the sharp tang of metallic wiring filled the space, a constant reminder of the stakes. "They're regrouping faster than we thought." Tessa's voice broke through the tension, her voice crackling through the comms. She was studying the data, her eyes darting between the laser plasma displays with rapid precision. "Their formations are tighter now, their shields reinforced. They're not backing down." Aaron's voice was grim, but there was an edge of anticipation beneath the weight of his words. He was positioned near the central console, his posture tense, eyes constantly flickering between the head-up display and the data streaming in from the fleet's sensors. Garrick's heart beat in a steady rhythm, each pulse a reminder of the role he had in this battle, the weight of command pressing heavier with every second. The first wave of Earth ships had created a breach in the Vraxian defenses, but now the real challenge began. The Vraxians were closing ranks, their movements coordinated and precise, a testament to their ruthless efficiency. The idea of taking the heart of their command center seemed impossible, but Garrick had seen far too many battles turn on a single, unexpected move. "We need to disrupt their defenses once more before they can get their countermeasures in place." Garrick spoke softly, more to himself than anyone else, his gaze still locked on the display. His fingers danced over the heads-up controls, making adjustments. The plan they had devised was complex, but it had to work. This was the only chance they would get. Tessa leaned in, her breath steady as her fingers manipulated the data. "We're going to need to push their front lines back while we infiltrate their central command station. We can't just engage with brute force. If we push too hard, we'll lose our advantage." Garrick nodded, his mind already calculating. "Right. The decoy fleets did their job. Now we use their overconfidence against them. If they think we're on the attack, they'll leave gaps in their defenses. That's where we hit them. We'll strike fast, Disable their main artillery first, then go for their command center while they're reeling. Aaron didn't flinch. You're asking for a precision strike. We need to neutralize their artillery first, then hit the command center right when they try to regroup. No room for error. Garrick's lips tightened as he processed the plan. It's not just precision, it's speed. They won't be able to adjust to our tactics in time. We keep them off balance until their lines collapse. He glanced at Chorus, who had been quietly observing, her eyes tracing the movements on the display. We've got no time to waste. Her voice was blunt, her eyes piercing as she met Garrick's gaze. If this doesn't work, we don't get another shot. I know, Garrick muttered, though there was no uncertainty in his tone. We don't get second chances. Get everyone in position. The next few minutes were a blur. Garrick's team moved with practiced efficiency, each crew member fulfilling their role as the plan shifted into action. On the display, the Vraxian fleet was beginning to stabilize, reorganizing into defensive formations, their massive ships pulling into tight, overlapping patterns that sought to lock out any potential intrusion. But Garrick could see it. He could see the openings. The Vraxians were making one crucial mistake. They were too predictable. Phase 1 in motion. Tessa's voice was steady, but the intensity of her focus echoed through every syllable. We've launched the first wave. Let's see how they react. The decoy fleet surged forward, taking fire from the Vraxian front lines, the ships lighting up with explosions. For a moment, Garrick felt a pang of unease as the decoy fleet absorbed the brunt of the Vraxian counterattack, their ships splintering and crumpling under the assault. But he didn't flinch. He knew this was the plan. They had to draw the Vraxians in. The decoy was doing its job. On the heads-up displays, Garrick watched as the Vraxians adjusted, tightening their formation, redirecting fire. They were preparing for the follow-up strike. This was their chance. Now, move the fleet into position. Phase 2 begins. Garrick's voice was sharp, his words cutting through the air as the command center shifted into action. Earth's ships launched from their concealed positions, swarming from multiple angles, catching the Vraxian defenses off guard. The fleet struck with overwhelming force, breaking through their defenses like a force of nature. The Vraxians scrambled, but they weren't fast enough. Earth's ships darted through their ranks, dodging fire, targeting weak points in the Vraxian formation, and ripping through their hulls with deadly accuracy. Garrick's fleet had the advantage of unpredictability, striking from unexpected positions, keeping the Vraxians guessing. We're in. The artillery's down. Aaron's voice rang through the comms, filled with a controlled edge. Now it's the command center. Let's finish this. Garrick could feel the battle shifting. The Vraxian fleet, which had once been so imposing, now seemed vulnerable, staggered by the precision of Earth's attack. The laser plasma displays flickered as Earth's fleet pushed into the heart of the Vraxian stronghold. Garrick's pulse raced. They were almost there. The Vraxian command center was just ahead, a massive fortress of gleaming black metal, protected by layers of defense systems that Earth's ships had already breached. But even as they closed in, Garrick knew the danger wasn't over. This was the final hurdle. If they failed now, the Vraxians would recover and push Earth's forces back into retreat. Take out their command center, now! Garrick's voice was a low growl, the words filled with a primal need to finish what they had started. The ships surged forward, guided by the intricate web of plans they had set in motion. A final series of strikes against the Vraxian heart, fast, brutal, and calculated. Their shields flickered as they tried to regroup, but they couldn't withstand the onslaught. The first explosion rocked the command center, sending shock waves through the fleet. The blast was deafening, the light from the explosion searing through the cold blackness of space. Garrick's heart pounded as the laser plasma displays showed the Vraxian fortress beginning to fracture, their central command station crumbling under the pressure. The Vraxians were finished. But even as the final blows landed, Garrick's gaze remained steady on the screens, watching as the wreckage of the enemy ships drifted away, burning in the wake of their destruction. They had done it. The Vraxian fleet was in ruins, their forces decimated, their command center reduced to rubble. But as the light from the last explosion faded, Garrick couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right. The battle was over, but the war, That was still to come. The screen flickered once more and Garrick's breath caught in his throat. A new transmission, unknown, untracked, was coming through. What was it? He leaned in closer, the realization settling in like a weight in his chest. The true war had only just begun. The aftermath of the battle left Earth's fleet scattered across space, the wreckage of Vraxian ships floating in every direction, their twisted forms evidence of the vicious battle they'd endured. But despite the destruction, despite the grim victory they'd earned, Garrick knew that the end of the fight wasn't near. Not yet. The last explosion had barely faded when the laser plasma display flickered to life, a message flashing across the screen. Unidentified transmission detected. His heart sank. It's not over. Chorus's voice was cold, sharp. She didn't need to say more. They all knew what this meant. The Vraxians, it seemed, had one last card to play. But for Garrick, there was no hesitation. He wasn't about to let them take this moment away, not after everything they had sacrificed. Activate full encryption. Garrick's voice was hard, decisive. His hands moved swiftly over the console, his gaze steady as he keyed in the commands. He watched the heads-up display as the transmission was decrypted, his eyes narrowing when the contents appeared on the screen. "It's them!" Tessa's voice was tense, almost a whisper. The transmission was not coming from the Vraxian ships. It was coming from somewhere else. For a long moment there was silence in the room, the kind that made every breath feel like a drumbeat in the back of their minds. It was almost too quiet, like the calm before a storm. "Who's sending this?" Aaron muttered, his hands frozen above his console. The answer came moments later, as the image on the screen began to resolve itself. It was a face, tall and gaunt, framed by jagged lines of alien architecture in the background. The figure was humanoid, but it was the eyes that made Garrick's chest tighten. They were cold, empty. And yet, there was something familiar about them, something deeply unsettling. "This is your final warning. You will not be allowed to leave." The alien's voice echoed through the speakers, sending a chill down Garrick's spine. "You have provoked the wrath of the infinite empire. Prepare for annihilation." The room froze. No one moved. No one breathed. The words seemed to linger in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating them. Earth had won its first major battle, but this was something else entirely. The scope of it hadn't even begun to sink in. Garrick's pulse raced. "We need to move, and fast. Get the fleet in position. Everyone, now!" His voice was louder now, urgent. There was no time to second-guess this. They had just barely dealt with the Vraxians. Who the hell were these people? That transmission, they're not just threatening us. They're warning us. But why now? Why after everything? Tessa's voice trembled slightly, but she was already working her console, pulling up every bit of intelligence they could gather. Garrick looked around at his team. Aaron was already on the move, contacting fleet commanders. Chorus stood behind him, her face stern but unreadable, like she had already accepted what was about to come. Tessa was inputting commands, sending coordinates to every ship in Earth's fleet, organizing them into tight formations. There was no question of backing down. Not after everything they had fought for. "We don't run," Garrick said, his voice sharper now, cutting through the tension. "We never run." The words weren't just for the crew, they were for himself, too. His chest tightened as the full weight of their situation hit him. This wasn't just about protecting Earth anymore. This was about survival on a galactic scale. The screen flickered once more and Garrick's breath caught in his throat. A new transmission, unknown, untracked, was coming through. What was it? He leaned in closer, the realization settling in like a weight in his chest. The true war had only just begun. The aftermath of the battle left Earth's fleet scattered across space, the wreckage of Vraxian ships floating in every direction, their twisted forms evidence of the vicious battle they'd endured. But despite the destruction, despite the grim victory they'd earned, Garrick knew that the end of the fight wasn't near. Not yet. The last explosion had barely faded when the laser plasma display flickered to life, a message flashing across the screen. Unidentified transmission detected. His heart sank. It's not over. Chorus's voice was cold, sharp. She didn't need to say more. They all knew what this meant. The Vraxians, it seemed, had one last card to play. But for Garrick, there was no hesitation. He wasn't about to let them take this moment away, not after everything they had sacrificed. Activate full encryption. Garrick's voice was hard, decisive. His hands moved swiftly over the console, his gaze steady as he keyed in the commands. He watched the heads-up display as the transmission was decrypted, his eyes narrowing when the contents appeared on the screen. "It's them!" Tessa's voice was tense, almost a whisper. The transmission was not coming from the Vraxian ships. It was coming from somewhere else. For a long moment there was silence in the room, the kind that made every breath feel like a drumbeat in the back of their minds. It was almost too quiet, like the calm before a storm. "Who's sending this?" Aaron muttered, his hands frozen above his console. The answer came moments later, as the image on the screen began to resolve itself. It was a face, tall and gaunt, framed by jagged lines of alien architecture in the background. The figure was humanoid, but it was the eyes that made Garrick's chest tighten. They were cold, empty. And yet, there was something familiar about them, something deeply unsettling. "This is your final warning. You will not be allowed to leave." The alien's voice echoed through the speakers, sending a chill down Garrick's spine. "You have provoked the wrath of the Infinite Empire. Prepare for annihilation." The room froze. No one moved. No one breathed. The words seemed to linger in the air like a heavy fog, suffocating them. Earth had won its first major battle, but this was something else entirely. The scope of it hadn't even begun to sink in. Garrick's pulse raced. "We need to move, and fast. Get the fleet in position. Everyone, now!" His voice was louder now, urgent. There was no time to second-guess this. They had just barely dealt with the Vraxians. Who the hell were these people? That transmission, they're not just threatening us. They're warning us. But why now? Why after everything? Tessa's voice trembled slightly, but she was already working her console, pulling up every bit of intelligence they could gather. Garrick looked around at his team. Aaron was already on the move, contacting fleet commanders. Chorus stood behind him, her face stern but unreadable, like she had already accepted what was about to come. Tessa was inputting commands, sending coordinates to every ship in Earth's fleet, organizing them into tight formations. There was no question of backing down. Not after everything they had fought for. "We don't run," Garrick said, his voice sharper now, cutting through the tension. "We never run." The words weren't just for the crew, they were for himself, too. His chest tightened as the full weight of their situation hit him. This wasn't just about protecting Earth anymore. This was about survival on a galactic scale. On the screen, the figure's image blinked, and the transmission cut off abruptly. The silence that followed was suffocating, but it was quickly replaced by the steady buzz of commands being given, of ships moving into position, of people who had no choice but to fight. "Status report." Garrick's voice was clipped as he turned to face the rest of the room. "All ships are moving into defensive formation," Chorus replied immediately, her voice calm, but carrying the same weight of urgency. "They're preparing to engage, but we don't have much time." Garrick stood still for a moment, his gaze shifting between the heads-up displays. The Earth fleet was ready. They had trained for this, fought through countless simulations, drilled through every possible scenario, but nothing had prepared them for what came next. The unknown enemy, this infinite empire, had made its move, and Earth was just beginning to realize how deep this war really went. "Tell the fleet this is our last stand." Garrick's words rang out like a war cry, and for the first time he allowed himself to feel it, the weight of everything they had endured, everything they had lost. And now, it all led here, to this single final moment. As the fleet moved into position, preparing to face whatever the infinite empire had in store, Garrick's eyes drifted to the horizon of the screen once more. The galaxy was unfolding before them, revealing secrets, revealing dangers they could never have imagined. And yet, humanity stood strong. No matter how many times they were pushed to the edge, they fought. And that fight, its ferocity, its determination, was something the universe had underestimated for far too long. They thought they could destroy us, Garrick said, his voice carrying the weight of centuries of human history. The others turned toward him, sensing the change in him, the deep, unyielding certainty that now filled the room. They thought we were just another species to wipe off the map. His eyes burned as he spoke, his hands gripping the edge of the console, every muscle in his body coiled and ready for the war that was about to come. But what they didn't understand is that we don't die easily. We fight. We always fight. And we fight to win. A slow smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. We're not just surviving anymore. This is our revenge. This is our vengeance. We will make them feel it. The room fell silent as his words echoed through the chamber, each person there feeling the weight of what he had just said. The air was electric with tension, but also with something else, something deeper, something undeniable. They had fought for survival, but now they fought for humanity's place in the galaxy. They fought to show the universe that Earth wasn't just a blip on the map. It was a force, a presence, something the cosmos would never forget. We're not just a species. Garrick's voice was quiet, but it cut through the room like a blade. We are Earth, and Earth doesn't back down. He turned toward the window, watching as the fleet gathered on the edges of space, their ships glinting like stars in the cold void. It's time to show them who we really are. The final message from the Infinite Empire had been delivered, but it hadn't broken them. Instead, it had forged something far stronger, an unbreakable will, a hunger to survive, to fight back with everything they had. Humanity had just learned how to fight in the darkest corners of the galaxy. And now the universe would finally know. When humans go to war, they don't just win. They make sure the enemy will never forget their name. Prepare for war. Let's make history.